You have a better side?
I don't know.
Great. We'll center ourselves. Thanks. Steve, thanks for coming.
Great to be here. A lot of energy, a lot of excitement.
It is. There's a lot of energy. Speaking of energy, before we get into it, I have a personal question. Every time we hang out, you look younger. You're like the Benjamin Button of tech here. What is the secret to that? And then we'll get into we heard some life science talks earlier, but I want the secret from the source here.
I'm flattered that you say that. Maybe it's because I'm hanging out with you, with a lot of young people and a lot of smart entrepreneurs that are inspiring me about the future.
Yeah, the energy is big here. All right, so again, I appreciate you coming. When I reached out, there was a purpose to it because it feels like we're at this moment here where AI has gone from a concept to now it's actualizing. And you were so key, and everyone talks about AI, it's the biggest thing, maybe even bigger than the internet. The last time we had this incredible shift in how everybody did everything was the internet, and you were one of the key people. You had Tim Berners-Lee, and he developed the World Wide Web, and then you had people like Mark Andreessen with the Mosaic browser, and then really it was AOL and in your company that brought tens of millions of people, popularized the internet. I mean, how many CD-ROMs did you guys send out back in the day?
A lot. Sorry about that.
And everybody over 40 is like, yeah, I got about 8 of those. Everybody who's under 30 here is like, what's a CD-ROM?
Yeah.
But there were a lot. AOL, if you were around in the 90s, it was AOL really that was bringing you onto the internet. So with that perspective, what do you see, first question would be, what do you see as the similarities and differences right now about this moment here and when kind of that mid-90s, mid to late 90s where you really saw everything go nuts with the internet?
Well, I think one similarity is it's been developing the technologies, in this case AI or the internet, for decades, and then hit a acceleration point. So 75 years of investment, including here at MIT around AI. It's really the last 18 months where things have really accelerated because obviously the overnight success of ChatGPT, which was 75 years in the making, and that really created momentum and excitement with entrepreneurs and investors and the general public, and attention from, I was yesterday meeting with some senators in DC around what to do around AI policy and so forth. So it went from developing in an interesting way, but not really captivating the moment, not really kind of capturing the zeitgeist, and suddenly it took over. The same thing was true with AOL. We started in 1985. At the time, only 3% of people were online, and those 3% were online about an hour a week. And for a decade, from 85 to 95, I'd go to conferences like this, and nobody cared about the internet. They're talking about semiconductors, personal computers, software. There's a few of us kind of fringy on the side who are talking about the internet. Most people didn't think the internet ever would be a mainstream phenomenon, more like a hacker and computer enthusiast kind of thing. And then in 95 with Netscape IPO and some other thing, it sort of accelerated and became sort of a little bit of a mania. You could tell that because companies would rename themselves something.com, just as now companies are renaming themselves something, AI, to be part of that
We're
movement.
USSteel.ai, we're a new company.
So, but at the same time, there's tremendous excitement. People do recognize the absolute potential of the technology, how it can transform business, transform society, improve healthcare, all the things that you're all aware of. But there also is a concern, a fear about some of the unintended consequences. In the case of the internet, because it grew so slowly, there was sort of a sense of let's kind of a light touch of regulation, let's kind of leave it alone. Here there's a sense that it needs more than that, not too much, because there's obviously a concern if you have too much regulation, it stifles innovation, but nothing is not likely to be the case, whether it be in this country or other countries. So it just shows you it's arrived, it's hit its moment. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. It reminds me of a song that most people in this room are too young to know, a Buffalo Springfield song. Something's happening here. What it is not exactly clear, and that people are trying to figure it out and try to maximize the benefits while also kind of hedging, minimizing some of the potential risks.
That makes sense. What was the year that you saw the tipping point with AOL?
It was 95. We went from two statistics I remember. I mentioned the initial usage when we got started. The other was we raised $1 million to get started.
$1 million?
In 1985, and then and we went public in 1992, the first internet company to go public. And in our IPO, we raised $10 million. And the market value that day was $70 million. And then 5 years later, it was $160 billion. So we'd been at it for a while. It was still growing slowly, and suddenly it really accelerated. The other data point is it took us 9 years to go from 0 to 1 million subscribers. And a couple years later, we're adding 1 million subscribers every month. And so it was a classic hockey stick that venture capitalists never believe appropriately, because it almost never happens. But in that case, it really did happen.
So based on that experience, when do you think we'll see that? Are we there now? Is it 18 months from now, 12 months? Like, again, you're looking at a lot of startups, so you're both your history and your field vision here. When do you think we're going to see that mass kind of acceptance and acceleration?
Well, I think we're seeing the massive interest in acceleration and the creation of new companies and a lot more venture capital going into the sector. So that is, bodes well for what's going to happen in this next phase. But what these things typically follow, and maybe this is a little different, but typically, including with the internet, there's this initial phase of people are working hard on it, but nobody's really paying attention. Then it moves into a phase where everybody's paying attention. It's a little bit too much hype, a little bit too much mania. Then it moves into a phase where it's kind of like a correction, a little bit disappointment. 2000, for example, a lot of the dot-com companies went public. A lot of them ended up going bankrupt, and it was sort of viewed as this internet nuclear winter. And the ones that survived then were able to accelerate, the Googles, the Facebooks, et cetera, and really become kind of significant, iconic kind of companies. So we clearly moved from that first phase where people were working hard on the research here at MIT and other places, but it wasn't really getting significant traction in the marketplace, and now we're in that phase where there is a lot of attention, and hopefully we'll figure out a way to move to the next phase in a way that is not quite as disruptive as it was with the dot-com side, where over, like 90% of the companies kind of ended up going bankrupt.
Well, one major difference. Who here is kind of a startup entrepreneur doing their own thing? Okay, about half. How many are working for like a Google, Microsoft, one of the big guys? All right, so we got the entrepreneurs.
Oh, I like that.
Steve, this is your room. These are your people.
Small tech, not big tech.
That's right. So small tech versus big tech. It's a great point, which is maybe one difference though between kind of the 1990s and the internet and today is that because of large language models, obviously it's more of a top down. You need massive scale and size and money to start developing, and where you were able to kind of ground up. And now there's a lot of top down. So how do we make sure that it's not just a 3-player field, and that you've been one of the great evangelists for the reason things work, and the way we stay ahead is because of the entrepreneurs, not because of big tech. But there's a risk that this becomes a big tech play.
No, there's a big risk of it, and I do worry that AI, because of sort of as you said, the sort of the table stakes and the need for data and so forth, could result in big tech getting bigger. And you've seen that in the market. There's some companies that have increased $1 trillion in market cap in the last couple of years based on the presumption they're going to dominate this next wave in terms of internet. These are great companies, and they're important companies, particularly in what's now a global battle with China and others around the future. But we can't let this just be around the big getting bigger. We need to make sure the playing field's level, so entrepreneurs with less capital, and also in places outside of Boston or outside of San Francisco or all around the country, have the opportunity to participate as well. And that is one of the things that I've been pushing hard for, including in Washington. I testified at the last Senate AI Summit, and my main message was this, which is we need to make sure that as you think about guardrails, you think about rules of the road, you err on the side of allowing new companies to start and scale, and don't do things that end up entrenching some of the incumbents, regulatory capture issues. And one key part of that is there's a big debate now in Washington, Brussels, other places about open source. And there is a concern, which is understandable, that open source results in losing control over the technology, and some bad things, national security risks, other things could happen. And that is a fair concern, but we have to have open source if we're going to make sure that this really is an open platform, a level playing field, and new companies, including some of those hopefully in this room, are able to launch and scale and become the next Google. And the lesson, going back to the internet, was when we got started, the only reason America dominated the internet is because the defense agency, a government agency, DARPA, funded the creation of the internet to create essentially a network that would withstand a nuclear attack, number one. Number two, a judicial decision was made to break up Ma Bell, the dominant, the only monopoly phone company, to create 7 regional Bell companies. That unleashed competition, and that's why the cost of being on the internet went from $10 an hour to nothing because of that competition. So that was a key decision. Another key decision was to essentially commercialize the internet. When we started in '85, it was still illegal for consumers or businesses to be on the internet. Right. It was for educational institutions like MIT or government agencies, not for consumers or businesses. Congress passed the telecom bill to commercialize the internet. And the final one, and the most important relative to this conversation, is the FCC mandated open access. So they said, we're not going to just create all these different phone companies, we're going to require that those phone companies allow others like AOL to run on their networks. And if that hadn't happened, the cost wouldn't have come down, the innovation wouldn't have accelerated, and certainly companies like ours wouldn't have existed. I don't think America would have led the charge. So how do we take some of those lessons forward here with AI and make sure it is open and new companies can emerge, and it's not just the big tech getting bigger?
Well, and again, that took Washington to bust up AT&T. So what's the prescriptive solution to make sure that we have many, our box, and we have the ability to start, for companies to start versus 3 companies to dominate?
That's why I made an event like this, having 2,000 people at an event, most of whom are entrepreneurs trying to imagine a future, and not just people representing the larger companies. We've got to lean into that and be backing this next generation of entrepreneurs. In terms of antitrust, it's a bigger, kind of conversation, and it is being considered now with the FTC and others being much more aggressive on antitrust issues. It is going to be harder. It already is harder for big companies to buy other big companies. There's more scrutiny, so that's slowing some of that, which is not all bad. At the same time, we don't want to move too far in that direction where it ends up kind of stifling some potential innovation, stifling a path for young companies in some cases should be acquired by the larger companies. So we want to go too far in that direction, but I do think we need to err on the side of making sure AI is open to all, err on the side of making sure the leaders in AI 20 years from now are new companies, new entrepreneurs that didn't exist. Just as with the leaders of the internet today are companies that did not exist. It was not AT&T that dominated that. It was not IBM that dominated. IBM spent $1 billion with IBM, Sears, and CBS to launch an online venture 25 years ago called Prodigy. $1 billion. Ended up, kind of failing. Our little company with $1 million ended up, kind of emerging. But then we got challenged by other companies, and we kind of lost our way, and new companies emerged. That's the arc of innovation. That's the arc of the American, story.
That's right. That's right. Well, you also mentioned before the idea that we need to make sure that there are entrepreneurs everywhere that are empowered to do this. I don't know if anybody's seen. Steve has this movement, Rise of the Rest. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the Rise of the Rest tour. Steve travels around and has traveled around over the years in an RV, and he pulls into towns like Cincinnati or Topeka or wherever, and go Cincy, and it's like Drake getting on the concert tour. He comes out and all the entrepreneurs.
It's not quite that.
And the van pulls up and the fans are there. It might be dozens or hundreds versus tens of thousands, but the entrepreneurs in these cities feel seen. And I've been hearing a lot, even walking around today, about the necessity to make sure that AI is inclusive, and that's absolutely right. But there needs to be geographic inclusivity, right?
No, the issue there, we launched Rise of the Rest 10 years ago, actually in Detroit, a city that we then did Forbes 30 under 30 conferences for a number of years, and we'll be going back to celebrate that in a couple of months, and Pittsburgh and others, which are the cities, by the way, that 100 years ago were the Silicon Valley of the time.
Sure. Detroit
was the most innovative city in America, fastest growing city in America, 5th largest city in America because everybody wanted to be part of the car revolution. Pittsburgh was powering the steel industry and the industrial revolution. It was really rocking and rolling. And so these cities had great histories, but there was some risk about not having great futures. And the progress in the last decade has been great. There's 1,400 new venture firms in these Rise of the Rest cities. Through our own Rise of the Rest seed fund, have made 200 investments in 100 different cities, and one of them actually, a company called Prion in North Carolina. Igor, the founder, will be speaking in a session, one of the next sessions. He was the original founder of the technology that Amazon acquired to create Alexa, and he's in North Carolina building Prion. We backed a company called Tempest in Chicago. Now it's 2,000 employees focused on using AI initially on oncology, so there can be a better diagnosis, a more precise intervention. We founded a company in Baltimore called Catalyte using AI to identify potential people have that has shifted some people that were truck drivers to now being, coders. So we're seeing this happening, all over the place. There's one company in Atlanta that's building a Mach 5 engine to go from Atlanta to Europe in 90 minutes. And some of that is the core technology around the engines, but they're also using AI and a plan with the military to do essentially an uncrewed mission, later this year. That company is in Atlanta. And so how do we make sure that as AI moves forward, it is open to all. It's not just the big getting bigger, but it also isn't just Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, which have dominated the last couple of years, continuing to dominate, because 75% of venture capital for the last decade has gone to California, New York, and Massachusetts. We have to level the playing field. And if we don't, this country, which some of you I'm sure are concerned I'm concerned about the hyper-partisanship, tribalism, some of that, not all of it, some of that is a lot of people in a lot of parts of the country feel left out by the technology revolution. They feel unheard. They feel that the innovations happening in places like Cambridge are ending up creating job loss in their community, and we're not offsetting that by launching new companies that can create jobs for those communities. They're mad, and that's playing out in politics, and the biggest risk to America, I think, is in an internal risk. China is a competitive risk, but an internal risk of the dysfunction and the hyper-partisanship. So how do we create more opportunity for more people in more places so more people wake up in the morning anxious, happy and enthusiastic about the future, not anxious and fearful about the future. And we're unique in coming in this morning and saying, oh, this is all possible. Most people in most parts of the country, trust me, I've been there, I've seen this, do not have that enthusiasm, do not have that optimism, and we have to create more jobs for more people in more places, and startups create most of the jobs. It's not small business, it's not big business, it's new business, companies under 5 years old. So we've got to do that if we're going to have a united country, as well as doing that if we're going to win and continue to be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world, which is a risk given what's happening globally. We've got to do that in a more inclusive way.
That's right. How do we, it's a catch-22 because the money goes to where the talent goes to where the money is, and there's this, perception, a lot of it's true, a lot of it's not, that Silicon Valley's got a majority of the AI talent, Boston's got a smaller but decent percentage, and some in New York, but really, those are the markets. So how do we solve the talent issue in places like Detroit or Pittsburgh or Atlanta?
Well, first of all, the talent has always been there. If you go to Silicon Valley, I was actually speaking at a conference, it wasn't Forbes, it was TechCrunch conference 5 or 6 years ago. There were, 2,000 or 3,000 people in the room. I asked for a show of hands, how many people grew up in the Bay Area? And it was like 5%. Everybody in Silicon Valley is from someplace else. They go there because that is the land of opportunity, because of the capital, other people there, an ecosystem of supporting risk-taking and so forth. But they grew up in other parts of the country. They went to school in other parts of the country. And some of our best universities, MIT is wonderful, Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh is wonderful, Michigan and Ann Arbor is wonderful, Ohio State and Columbus is wonderful, Georgia Tech and Atlanta is wonderful. But when they've graduated historically, and it started to change in the last decade, historically they've left those places to go to the coast because that's where the action was. That's where the money was. And so if we reverse that and people have the flexibility to build companies wherever they choose to build companies, and the pandemic has been a little bit helpful there in terms of freeing up some flexibility around how people work and where they work and so forth. And we merge that with, or blend that with capital so people can access capital to get started. That creates opportunity in those places. The last point is right now the focus tends to be on the horizontal platform AI applications, which obviously is really important. The real action is when AI meets the real world, and AI basically it gets integrated into the core industries of our country, healthcare and food and agriculture and so forth. And that's when being in other places may be advantaged, because most of the companies you need to partner with are in those other places. MD Anderson in Texas, Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, Johns Hopkins in Maryland. Those are super important institutions to partner with if you're trying to reimagine, disrupt the healthcare sector. So it will advantage people that are close to it. It'll advantage people that have some credibility with those institutions so they can build trust and establish partnerships. And I think partnerships and policy will be much more important in this next wave of innovation, the next 20 years, than it has been in the last 20 years.
I think you make great points there. And we had the Forbes Under 30 Summit in Boston for 3 years, and that was about 6-7 years ago. And I remember coming here, and I had a lot of meetings with Mayor, Marty Walsh, the mayor, and Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts. about what this event could do. We have 5,000 to 10,000 young entrepreneurs at that event. And it struck me that the thing that was haunting them and the reason they were very keen to have this, and it boiled down to one word, which was Facebook.
Yeah.
And the reason it was Facebook is because Facebook was founded here. It was founded about 2 miles away from here. But yet they felt like even in Boston, they felt like they had to go to San Francisco because of the quote unquote talent. And imagine how much different Boston will look. Listen, Boston's doing great, but imagine how much different it will look if Facebook was still based in Boston. So the secret is, right, in Atlanta, right, Georgia Tech, every school you mentioned is amazing. How do you send the message to the entrepreneurs coming out of those schools or surrounding those schools that they could stay home where they're comfortable, where they like it, and build
tap into
businesses.
talent. Like Georgia Tech has a great program. So Hermias is attracting dozens and dozens of people out of Georgia Tech, and so it's a competitive advantage for them. And if they were just moved to, San Francisco, the battle for talent is more intense. So I think there are some strategic advantages, some cost of living advantages, but you have to have the venture capital there. You have to keep the talent there, slow the brain drain of people leaving, create a boomerang of people returning, and you have to create an ecosystem that is around risk taking. As you all know, it's hard, it's challenging, it's risky to start a company, and being in a community which recognizes that and supports that, which is one of the great things about Silicon Valley, or one of the great things about Cambridge. How do we create those communities in more parts of the country?
Very important. I want to touch upon what you just mentioned about hyperpartisanship. Again, your experience is so valuable here because I got on the internet with AOL myself, and it was an amazing tool because all of a sudden I was reconnecting with all my grade school friends that I'd never, I would love, and we started email chain. It was just this mind-blowing experience. But what it also unleashed, a lot of the hyperpartisanship is after the first few years were super friendly, but then a lot of the internet obviously became weaponized in terms of putting everyone into factions. How do we, based on that experience, not let AI accelerate that exponentially?
No, that is the core question. I'm super proud of obviously the role internet's played in our lives and how transformative it's been and how empowering it's been. And it's more so than I would have expected in my wildest imagination. That said, I also recognize there have been some unintended consequences that are unfortunate and disappointing, and what's happening with the weaponization of social media is a good example of that. I always thought that one of the great things about the internet is everybody could have a voice, and it wasn't just the newspapers and magazines and the TV networks with a small number of people with megaphones. Everybody could have a megaphone, and that has proven to be true, where people have blogs and can figure out ways to share their ideas with people. But with that came this tribalism. People generally are following people that are like them, generally watching television networks that kind of reinforce their views. They're not really getting exposed to other views and sort of the other side, which has created more of this tribalism. As a result, there are issues around privacy, issues around safety for kids, issues around mental health related to particularly social media. This is a real concern, not just here in this country, but around the world. And so there is a backlash against social media. There is a backlash against the internet. There's a backlash against big tech. There's a backlash against Silicon Valley that's happening because people see the benefits, but also recognize their risk and don't think the companies that are taking the lead right now are responsible enough in trying to maximize the benefits and minimize the risk, which is why there's more of a focus on making sure we get AI right and don't just let the market figure it out. We need some kind of policies, which I understand with the motivation. At the same time, I worry that it could overreach. What's happening right now in Europe, what's proposed is an overreach that likely will stifle innovation in Europe. But doing nothing is not an answer. And each of you, as you think about your companies, need to make sure you're engaged in this discussion and you're helping to forge the right policy so we can maximize the good things, minimize the bad things. Basically, regulations are an attempt to keep bad things from happening. How do we also make sure we are enabling good things to happen? And that really is by putting things in the hands of entrepreneurs, including people in this room. So as you're building your company, if you do emerge as the next Google or the next big company, recognize that there are a lot of benefits that come with that, but you also shoulder a lot of responsibilities to help get this right. So our society it really does benefit, and there's not some benefits and then also a lot of negatives.
No pressure, guys. That's a great way to end. It's kind of like when you're giving the Oscar speech and they start playing the music when John's on stage. He's like the. But we really appreciate your time and your wisdom, and I hope you're going to stick around for a little bit because we've got Steve's one of the great proponents of entrepreneurs, and this is a building today full of entrepreneurs. So I think
that's why I'm here. Thank you, Randall. Thank you, John. Thank you all.
Thank you.